All right, hopefully that has started the recording. Hello, everybody. We are working today through the source reporting tab with the different fields that are required across all of the different source types that we have in the clearinghouse. And so I'm going to go through that today, and then our next training will be on batch upload. So I've just loaded a single urban drought conservation report. This single urban drought conservation report is essentially the same information for different types of systems. So it's exactly the same fields that you would see in a regular drought and conservation reporting report type. So I'm going to go through the source reporting because this water system happens to have all of the different types of sources available. So we can actually go through this one by one. So the first sub-tab over here is called groundwater and goody. So all wells, whether they're groundwater wells or groundwater under the influence of surface water wells, have roughly the same information. They are consolidated into one type of report for that type of source. If you see any inconsistencies in naming, see any inconsistencies in classification, you're like, well, that's not a groundwater, that's a surface water, or that's a spring. Please do let us know. Your district office will be able to change the type. It's not easy, but we can change the type. We certainly change names. We can do something to change the appearance. Definitely, if you're missing sources or you have a source there that's not one of your sources, let your district staff know. You can let us know. We'll still point you to the district staff, and they're the ones, and the LPA staff, they'll be able to work with you on changes to the sources that are shown up there. This is not controlled by the clearinghouse. Clearinghouse does not control what is seen and not seen here and what the display is. This is in our database. It's pulled over from our database, and that is managed by the districts and the LPAs. In this case, we have a well, and it's got its source information here. On the left-hand side, you'll see static source information that does not change, cannot be changed by the user. This is all from our database, latitude, longitude. If you have changes to this information, it's got to go through the district or LPA. It cannot be done directly by you. So if you're saying, well, that's not an active well, that's an inactive well, you're going to have to notify us directly, or that's the incorrect latitude, longitude. You'll have to let us know to change that information. It cannot be changed from within the clearinghouse because it's in a separate database. Okay, for wells, there's specific well data points that we pull out. One of them being the well construction date. So we have, we can go pretty far on this. We can go back to the 1800s, maybe even farther, basically 1800. So if you have a well construction date that is in that time period, you can enter that, and that's listed here. If you don't enter it, this is not a required field. It does not have an asterisk here. It's not required to be able to submit your report. It's very important to note that. If you don't have that information or don't choose to provide that information for now, too much work to look for, you can leave it blank. Now, every time that you open and close this source, you may be asked to provide that information again. Let's see, I'm trying to exit out of here. There it is. You might be asked to provide that information again, but it's gonna like be populated here. I'm not seeing this information save, and I'm worried that it's not working. So, oh, there it is. Okay, so here's the well construction date. I've added it, I've saved it, and now it shows up under static source information. However, every time I click into this well, that pop-up is going to show up because I have missing information. It's just annoying. You can just ignore it, or you can provide the information. I'm going to show you how to provide the rest of the information. For well depth, I believe maybe we have a restriction here. Yes. So if you put 3,000 feet below ground surface as your well depth, it's going to be too large. So we're looking for something probably in the 2,000 range. Curious if anybody here has a deeper than 2,000 foot well. Yeah, 2001 is too large. If anybody has anything deeper than that, please let me know. I've heard up to 3,000 is what other folks have allowed, but I'm curious if anybody has a well that's over 2,000, please mention it in the question and answer for our records. That would be helpful to note. So once you enter the well depth, we now know how deep your well is. That doesn't change. That's why it's in the static source information. The well construction date, well depth, whether it's a fractured hard rock well, is not expected to change. And therefore, we put this in static source information so we don't keep re-asking you every period. At some point, all of these fields are going to show up in a different place altogether, and it's only going to be updated on an annual basis. For now, we're collecting this stuff for the first time, so we're kind of asking on a monthly basis. So hopefully well construction date, the date well was constructed, well depth, the depth of the well. Now, if you have a horizontal well and it happens to be classified as a well and not a spring, which probably would be more appropriate for some horizontal wells, you do have a construction date. And you typically also have a well depth, except it's not a depth, it's a well length, right? It's how deep into the mountain that your horizontal well is. You can place that here. At some point, we'll be renaming and creating a definition for that field to allow that to receive horizontal well data as well. And for fractured hard rock wells, you either are or aren't. You're either in sort of alluvial soils in an aquifer, or you're outside of that aquifer. That's a simple definition from DWR. And if you have any questions about that, you could just leave it blank and try to find out the answer to that question. I think that'd be more appropriate. Now, for the majority of groundwater wells, with the exception of Goody wells, you're not going to have a water rights ID. Water rights ID is typically for surface water or surface water or source water under the influence of surface water. So, and these reporting numbers are typically something like, a letter with a series of numbers. And you can enter each one as needed, and it'll create a list. If you don't know your water rights ID and you want to add something to this field so the pop-up stops showing up, we can also accept unknown and not available or not. Oh, I limited the field, so you can't do that. You can do NA. So you can put that in there. That'll suffice for the field. If you mistype something, you can click on the X button and it will delete that field. But this is, again, if you don't have a water rights ID, you don't know if you have a water rights ID, the likelihood is you probably don't have one. And in the future, we'll add something here that allows you to mark that it's not applicable for your source, and that'll suffice for most of you. But you can also put unknown or NA. We will be converting those into that checkbox field once we add that functionality, where you'll be able to actually pick the water rights ID from a list of valid water rights IDs instead of typing your own. This is not for your system number. This is not intended for you to put your system number. This is not intended to put your source number. This is a Division of Water Rights issued water rights ID, application ID. Okay. For the well completion report number here, this is typically these older well completion reports. We have these well completion reports from the well driller when they were initially drilled, and there's an identification number on there. Now, the Oscar system has a system of digitizing these well completion reports. So they have a lot of them digitized, but there's a lot of them that are not digitized. So this is actually, when you put your report number in here, it allows us to tie the number with the archived file that they have that has not been digitized, or in the second example, to actually upload your well completion report here with the number so that Oscar can take that and potentially one day add it to their database. They're like, oh, okay, that's a drinking water well. Let's prioritize putting that into our database. And if they can't find it, then they now are able to add it using that. So I can also click on this See Example so you can see what an example well completion report might look like. So you'll see this is a well completion report. It typically has a number and highlighted right there. This is another well drillers report that has a number here. Another well drillers report, highlighted number here, and here's some other examples of well completion reports. This one looks like a much newer one here, issued by the local permitting agency. You have a well drillers number right here. This is a more new one. I think this is an Oscar capable number. So this is really to help us create like this crosswalk between Oscar wells and our wells. We're trying to benefit each other so that what they report, we don't have to ask for, and what you report to the clearinghouse, they don't have to ask for, vice versa. We're trying to link the systems together. This is to help us to do that. So hopefully you have that completion report number for each well. And if you can add that in there, that would be great. If not, the pop-up will keep coming, and then you can upload the file. The cool thing is, once you upload the file, I can choose a file right here, and I can upload a PDF, a scan, or a picture. And then it adds it to this link, and now I'm able to have that available to be downloaded later. So I saved it, and you can see I can actually view the document that I uploaded. So if you ever, needed a system to store all your PDFs for all your well completion reports, you could actually use this as a system to do that. Because every source can have their well completion, every well can have their well completion report uploaded to this portal. And we'll work on some easier way of making that available to be pulled out. The last thing I have here is the Department of Water Resources site code identification number. If you don't have this, you've not been issued one, you can request one. Now I can note here for the well completion report number and for the water resources site code identification number, if you would want to locate one or create one for your source, you can populate this request form here. And this allows you to, provide some information to DWR about your water system name and number and what type of assistance that you need to identify your well completion report, maybe to identify your number. And they have a service that is going to allow folks to find that data or create that data if it does not exist. And that's supposed to help you through that process. Now, once you save this information, it will log the last time that you edited it separately from the report. And it's going to show who has reported that field inside the source information. But for those who are adding and removing data on the outside, you're going to show in the top right corner who's reported that information. So two separate places because it's two separate types of information. Okay, that's the static source information section up on top. Now, as we go on through the report, this source activity question says, did you utilize this source during the reporting period? So you can imagine you have inactive wells, you have pending wells, you have standby sources that are not used on a regular basis, sources that are under maintenance. For whatever the case, you did not have any reporting of production for that month, you're going to want to mark no. You can also utilize this if you have a situation where you have in series, you have a flow from a source flowing to another source, flowing into another source. In the case of like intakes, for example, you have a reservoir flowing into an intake, flowing into another intake. If you have that situation and reporting data for each one of those would double or triple count or more the amount of data that you're reporting, we only want you to report once. So pick one, pick hopefully the closest one to your distribution system, how much that source is producing, and put no for the rest of them. That will allow you to have zeros for the amount produced during that reporting period. So this is a really key field that we use to say which are required and which are not required. You can see when it's yes, some fields are required. When it's no, we have fields that are no longer required. So if the source is not utilized, what are you allowed to report? We have number of feet from ground surface to the groundwater table using monitoring systems sufficient to detect groundwater levels. And the value must not be greater than the pumping water level. So the static water level, I don't have a diagram for you, but the static water level is the level at which the water sits in feet below ground surface. So if you dropped a string down your well, the moment that it hits the water level when the pump has been off for a while, for about 24 hours, that is how deep your water level is. Now, once you turn the pump on, that is called your pumping water level. So your static water level typically drops, and then you have a lower pumping water level than you have a static water level because of that straw sucking effect, right? It's going to create a cone of depression around your well, and your pumping water level could be lower than your static water level. Why is this important? Well, static water level tells us a lot about the health of your aquifer, and your pumping water level also tells us about the health of your well. If your static water level is dropping over time, that's telling you about the health of your well, potentially other nearby wells in that area. If your pumping water level is getting dangerously close to your pump depth or your well depth, we can understand that your source could go dry at any moment. And if your pump depth can no longer go down to your well depth because it's at the well depth, then we know we can't even provide resources to be able to lengthen your well or drop your pump down to get more water because you are at the bottom of your well. So this is giving us information about the source condition, your reliability of your source, to understand how stable and reliable your source might be. So that's static water level. Pumping water level is during pumping. Yeah, if you have the ability to measure that static water level while you're pumping, it's no longer static, it's pumping. And if you do not have any of this information, you can mark not available. Now, pumping water level, that's for pumping, so we didn't require it when you don't utilize the source. But when you do utilize the source, you can enter pumping water level. And let me show you what happens. Like, let's say you have a 50. So this water level is 50 feet below ground surface. And if I put a pumping water level of 25, it's going to say my static water level is too large, because that doesn't make sense. My pumping water level should be below my static water level. It should be something more like 75. And the date measurement is within the reporting period. If you have an older measurement, you're going to have to pick not available. So it's within the reporting period that you have to measure your static water level. It could be any time within the reporting period, but it has to be within the reporting period to be reported for this reporting period. Of course, if you only measure quarterly, some months you're going to have a value, and 2 other months you're going to mark not available. That is acceptable for now. We don't have a frequency for how often you have to measure static water level. However, you have to have monitoring sufficient to detect groundwater levels, which indicates to me your system has to be capable of doing this regularly. What regularly means is kind of up in the air right now, but I would anticipate at least minimum, if you want to be prepared for the future, I would say be prepared for quarterly monitoring of static water level. So make sure you have a system in place that can measure static water level on a quarterly basis. If you have to pull the pump, if you have to issue a boil water order, if you have to tell people not to water their lawns in order to take a static water level, that is not a system, right? That's very onerous. It basically means you're never going to measure your water level that way. We want a system in place that is easy for you to measure water level. And the pump depth is simply the depth below the ground surface that the pump exists. If you don't have that information, again, click not available. If you click not available, the field will show yellow. And I have some other red fields, but if these were the only fields that were not filled out and they're not available, it's going to mark the whole thing as yellow. If all I have is yellow tabs, I can submit my report. I don't have to provide this value in order to submit my report. It's just flagging that you have provided and not provided data for some required fields, but you can still submit your report, and we don't have current plans to go back in time and require these fields to be submitted. So I want to make that clear. For potable amount produced during reporting period, we have the amount produced by that source. If you have a source that produces one portion of it goes to a completely separate system for non-potable uses. Let's say you have a parallel irrigation system that goes to some agricultural users and it's completely separated from the other system, then perhaps you'd only want to report the quantity of water that gets used for potable production, not the amount that gets used for non-potable production. So you can have cases where you have a well that does double duty. Maybe it supplements the recycled water system and it supplements your system. We only want the portion that is potable amount produced. This is going to be more important when we get into surface water sources, where you could have a portion that just goes to raw recharge or aquifer storage recovery, and it doesn't go into your system. So we can talk about that in a little bit. But it's that amount that's going to be used for potable usage. However, if that well is being treated, we're not looking for the treatment plant effluent. We're looking for the amount of water that is being used to treat, to produce that potable water. So for example, if you produced 100 million gallons for treatment and you used 100 million gallons as the influent to your treatment plant, and maybe only 70 million gallons in our O case, EDR case, only 70 million gallons are produced, we're going to want to see the 100, not the 70. We want to report that as treatment plant losses in an other category under demand. We don't want to account for it here. So we are looking for the amount the source is producing that is intended to be used for potable use, not the actual potable water produced by a treatment plant. So I know that's a little complicated. We're trying to put some more terminology and fixes into the help tips to make this a little bit more clear. But that is what we're doing for now. Date measured cannot be changed. Your unit of measure can be changed to the units that you want, but in the back end, everything gets converted to gallons to do comparisons. But there are some conversions that are available. For total pump hours during reporting period, you can enter any number up to the number of hours that exist during the reporting period. So if there's only 720 hours that exist in that reporting period, you cannot report 730 because that's a limitation, right? So if I put 750, it's going to be too large. What this pump hours is designed to do is it's to provide a nominal estimate of how much GPM you can produce. If you only operate a certain amount of hours in a month and you only produce a certain amount of gallons in the month, it doesn't matter what the instant flow rate says. This is your average production rate. Your instant flow rate could be an instantaneous fluctuation. It could be on startup, it could be after extended period of time. We're really looking for like, what's your nominal flow rate? This might give us an indication of your flow capacity between these two numbers, but it's not accurate as to like a pump test that is verified, every couple of years you might verify a pump test. That number, we're gonna have a separate field for that. You could expect that probably over the next year or two to have a separate field to report your pump verification test numbers. Instant flow rate is how much that flow can produce. If you have something producing 500 GPM, you can put that there and the date measured when you measured it. Some folks have trouble with this. If you have a flow meter, typically you might do like a timer test on how much flow is being produced, over a period of time. You might do a calculation there, like test it for a minute. You might do a bucket test if you don't have a meter where you can flow that source into a bucket that's about a gallon and see how long it takes to fill up the whole gallon, and do your calculations for how many gallons per minute that you're producing from that well. So we're not looking for anything super exact. It's a condition of your source. So it allows us to get a picture on how well your source can produce. We'll be using that in the future. The last question I have here, was the source under curtailment at any point within the reporting period? Well, I'll answer that question very simply. If you don't have a water rights ID, you were not curtailed. And currently right now, even if you did have a water rights ID, there's nobody being curtailed. So either the answer is no, because I have a water rights, I'm not being curtailed, or you have no idea what this question means, or you know for sure you have no applicable water rights for the source. This is going to be accurate for most of you for well sources. You can also enter source comments as this system has done here. We have some questions. We have some questions in the queue that have not been answered yet. So that certainly can be done as well.